So the mission of Illinois Aviation was to transmit a message that was positive, transmit a message that aviation was not dead, and transmit a message that there's still things we can do in aviation, and that's been the mainstay. We were running webinars every week, every Wednesday night at 6 p.m. As we've gone along, we got a lot of response, a lot of people active, involved with it. And then when we got to about October of 2020, we decided to go with every other week. So if you don't follow us on Facebook, please do. On Wednesday nights, we do the Wednesday webinar, and it's live and you can interact with our guests. Next week, 2 weeks from now, at our next webinar, we'll be having the actual director of the DuPage Airport Authority will be our guest. So he's going to talk to us about what's going on at DuPage Airport, developments, the future, in addition to what it's like day to day to operate a large airport. In fact, an airport that once again in 2020 had more operations than Midway because of Illinois Aviation. Anyway, we didn't quite beat O'Hare. We'll work on that. So that's anyway. Anyway, with the developments of everything that's going on, this is our first webinar live in person via a FAST team seminar. Those webinars that you see online, and by the way, I forgot to mention, are FAST team events. So if you do attend them, you do register and ask for credit, either through Elmer, our chief pilot over here, or through myself. We'll provide you the credits, and you may use them towards your VFR. Or if you want to move up the levels in the wings program, you can earn your gold wings. What that does for you, not only helps you get the VFR for free, it reduces your insurance rates if you end up owning an airplane. So that's kind of a nice thing to do. So we always want to beat the insurance company. Anyway, with that tonight as well, I'd like to ask everybody to consider this is we are guests tonight technically of Explorer Post 1426. 1426, believe it or not, started in our old hangar facility back in 1998. So it's been around actually for a long time. And we got to kill the pump too before that thing goes off too. We did. That's good. All right, so can't do anything about the phone. Anyway, Explorer Post 1426 is designed for young men and young women that are interested in aviation to explore, learn, and do neat things. Dag, who's right here, Dag has facilitated not only a tour and the ability to get on a 777 before. Where was it going to? I forgot. Is it going to Narita? Somewhere over in Asia. He facilitated a tour for all of us to go and tour United Airlines maintenance facility. And then he actually literally had himself and a Boeing engineer talk about rocket science here, which is pretty cool. So those are opportunities that we're trying to help young people get in and expand in aviation. So if you don't mind, they have a bake sale here this evening. I'd like to ask if they're just looking for donations, but these donations that they make, that you make, allow them to go, like I'm promoting drones. So if they were to buy a drone and fly it around, and we let them rent the drone, like the RC airplane, the objective is they can take it out, practice, and build a skill they can use. Or if they want to do more things and say maintenance and work with Dan, which they've done as well, these help pay for the supplies so they can do these things or go on these field trips to learn things. So anything that you can give, if it's 5 cents, $5 or $500, because Kevin's ready to donate because he's an airline pilot. Whatever you can donate would be greatly appreciated. They're great kids, great aviation enthusiasts. I'd really like to, we got to do that. It's our future. We forget about the future. Aviation is already pretty grim. There's a lot of open spots and maintenance positions, engineers, air traffic controllers, dispatchers, and pilots. So there's a lot of positions that need to be filled, and we need them to fill it. We got to talk them out of being anything else. We want them in aviation. So with that being said, without any further ado, this is technically a scout event. As with all scouting events, we do start with a pledge of allegiance, and I'd like to ask our acting vice chair person to come on up. And are you coming up, Haley, as well? Kirsten and Haley, come on up here. And they're going to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, with that being done, if you, other things, if you haven't been to Illinois Aviation before, bathrooms are not there. Okay, don't get any ideas. Actually, I was talking to you. Don't get any ideas. These are great. Bathrooms are in the corner. Coffee, got cups, and because it's aviation, it's going to be nonstop. Please help yourself to as much coffee as you can drink, then use the bathroom. Not that. And once again, if you need to get a snack, we're going to take a break through the presentation. But if you need to stretch your legs and grab a snack and donate, please do so. $500, Kevin.
Yeah.
Okay. So,
we can see the presentation for it.
yeah, come on over here. You're the star of the show. So this young man here that's kind of like trying to play low key over here. He's Dan, the man with the leather tan, as I've called him for about 10 years now. Dan has been part of Illinois Aviation for about 10 years. Dan came here as one of the top of your class from Lewis University, if I remember correctly. Number 1, right? Yep. Oh, tied. Sorry, he was tied as number 1 as his maintenance class from Lewis University. And then how many seen airplane repo? Everybody seen airplane repo? Well, guess who the mechanic that fixed those planes or took the parts off those planes that they repossessed? That guy. So he had the pleasure of actually being part of that team, fixing, taking apart, putting together crazy airplanes. So we got him from the airplane repo guy to come here. He's been here keeping all these planes flying, which is a task. And then I guess we should also introduce your team that's here as well. You want to introduce your team, your maintenance team that's in attendance?
Hey, welcome aboard, everyone. That's all I can say for getting started here. I have a maintenance team of mechanics around me, and usually I don't give presentations on anything in the department. We're busy all the time addressing concerns with corrosion and fixing airplanes. But the people I have around me are, I have Rachel, and I have Abel, who's also a pilot, and he did pass his certified flight instructor test. So let's give him a round of applause for Abel Gomez. Okay. And then I have Frank, who's also a student from Lewis University, who is graduating with his A&P license. He has been signing off as an airframe mechanic right now, and I believe he is going to finish up his power plant and be able to, sign off full inspections all the way up until annual, which is something that inspection authorization requirements dictate that an authorized inspector perform the inspection along with the help of anybody, but needs to sign off every year.
So is corrosion good?
Corrosion is terrible. I have it all over my car.
Does it happen typically to any airplane?
Yeah, corrosion is a huge factor in certain areas, and it depends on the climate. Around here, especially, a lot of different types of corrosion can be attributed to just the climate. And if you look at the southern, eastern seaboard, coastal airports and places where aircraft are operating regularly, that type of corrosion caused by a sea, water, air environment where naturally it just attacks the aluminum structures of the airplane and causes corrosion.
And so like a case in point, we have Hawaiian Aloha Airlines 737 where the literally turned into a convertible. That would be an example of corrosion, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I remember this from school. It's an example of, if I read out loud, it does say if they're leveling off, pilots heard a whooshing sound from the fuselage, which,
A little one?
well, they were listening to the top of the airplane ripping off. And a windy noise, but the captain of the plane observed that there was blue sky where the first glass ceiling had been. So I think none of the passengers, the airplane did land safely, so they did make it back. I think they weren't, I was going to say fly the airplane from descending it at an altitude where explosive decompression would be an issue, but the corrosion that I was told happened was due to using like lead pencils in marking certain areas of the structure that needed sheet metal repair. And as far as I know, the dissimilar metal from the pencil marked on the aluminum and left there and not rubbed off caused enough corrosion for it to deteriorate over time, crack, and then structural failure result. These are things like we try to take note of when we're training to become mechanics, because you can't just pick up pencils and start marking things when you do a sheet metal project. If you're repairing a fuel cell, is different because you'd be using welding, but again, if you use the right type of markers, you will prevent the type of corrosion that can occur from them. So soft tip markers, Sharpies, things like that are recommended. We will not use ballpoint pens because we're not sure of the chemicals that are in the inks involved. But we do use certain types of markers in order to prevent disaster from happening.
So like this MiG is a pretty crazy one. That's most of our 172s don't have ejection seats, so you're gonna.
I saw this slide too, and was trying to figure it out. As far as it looks like a Russian MiG, I think it's a MiG-23 Flogger from the 1970s when they came out with things that crashed in Belgium. But I wanted to read about what it say.
So that one was kind of a bizarre one. This one though, I think it's like reminiscent of a Piper, and talking about the welds. And I know that like a lot of older planes, and being that a 172 starts at 400,000 now, and a Piper Warrior or an Archer now starts at 400,000 as well. You're going to see a lot more older planes flying, and I guess with welds and whatnot, you can get it.
The aging of the general aviation fleet is just a major concern, as you can tell. When your nose wheel falls off your airplane because it cracked from, looks like rust. The landing gear on this Zenair looks like almost similar to a Piper landing gear that you would find on Archers, Warriors, Cherokees, where it's the same thing. This looks like rust, and rusted environment caused metal fatigue, and metal fatigue occurred right at the point where you didn't want it to occur, because it was in a spot where it looks like once it went, it probably went unnoticed for a long time, and when it goes, it looked like it rips right off because of the landing gear being under that kind of stress on a hard landing, so to speak.
So in the NTSB, they make this little statement here, of course, because the pilot is always at fault. I notice they say this incident shows how important it is to select proper detection techniques adequate to the structure and the information that we have to gather. So
I'm not sure that they ever say, where do they say that the pilot's always involved? Usually maintenance gets blamed for it, don't we? Isn't the finger pointed at?
yeah, I'm thinking here that they're hitting both maybe, because I'm smelling that that's called, did you do a pre-flight inspection and take a look at it? And it's what I'm smelling here. So I guess you can.
That's true, but there's a lot of things a pilot won't look at on a pre-flight inspection because it's not on the checklist, whereas the mechanics, they go more in depth. So
Yeah. Like this is one that the pilots couldn't detect. That is the most recent one, and you could probably talk a little bit about we'll call it the cause and effect. This is the Piper Arrow crash, that the Embry-Riddle Piper Arrow crash, where they literally, the wing is visibly 200 yards away from the airplane. So you want to talk about that one? That's what we
this is the big one of recent. It's going to affect a lot of airplanes. I believe pretty much the whole Piper low wing fleet. From, I don't know, this was a newer airplane that was maybe, I believe, less than 20 years old. So it's considered a newer Embry-Riddle. This one, I did read up on it, had 7,700 hours on it. So, and being operated in flight school, but this was an inboard wing spar failure, which is the main structural internal component that holds your wings on. And it did happen only 2 miles away from the airport from an altitude of 800 feet. So they were literally just coming in on the side, and they were so close to coming in and actually landing when it happened. And this was because of a failure of a section, and you can see that in the second part of the lower spar cap, which is bolted on by basically the wing spar mounting bolts. And there's 2 rows of these big bolts, 10 on each side, 2 rows of 5. And the inboard bolt failed because of a twisted doubler. And doubler is just the secondary support piece added to structure to kind of make sandwich layers and build it up to make it stronger. So in this incident, that failed, and it wasn't seen by any inspection process because visual inspection was taking place up until this point, and it was more of an internal failure because it affected the bolts themselves, weakened the bolt, which caused the structure to rip and tear apart. On this, it does say that the importance of inspecting the main structural components for cracks, which accelerate. This is true. The underside of these low-wing airplanes get neglected, and that's only because nobody likes to get on a creeper crawler if there's one around and start to clean all the oil and soot and grease and everything that's covering the belly of the airplane. This is huge. These bolts are located right there, and they're only covered by a little plastic cap that has 3 screws attaching it, I believe. So everything gets in there, and it builds up, and the plastic cap actually almost acts as a cup to hold water or anything that those bolts might sit in over time. So if that's not looked at, it's not addressed, it becomes an issue. Yeah, the saltwater environment Embry-Riddle, I believe this a Florida crash does play a part, but Piper did not have any kind of special inspections. When this happened, it triggered like a national proposed rulemaking process. It triggered a Federal Aviation Administration basically investigation to look into what caused it. And when they found out what caused it, it came out as an airworthiness directive just a matter of a couple months ago. That's going to affect all the Pipers that have this condition, which pretty much covers all of the Piper PA 28 fleet.
So that's you, right?
Yeah, the slides are all mixed up in here.
So that is you. So anyway, so I think we all can agree based upon those accidents that we just looked at, that corrosion is serious, and it can cause an airplane structure to fail, parts to fall off, pilots to eject, and wings to go into somebody's backyard, which are all bad. We can agree on that.
Yeah, that's more your list than you can handle.
Tonight, I think what Dan and I are excited to do is talk to you a little bit about corrosion. And Dan, we've got a slideshow of. I had no idea how many different types of corrosion there is. I thought there was like maybe 2 or 3, and after going through this presentation, find out there's like 10 or 12. It's kind of crazy. How many people knew there was 12 different corrosions? Okay, I expect all the mechanics to raise their hand.
Everyone knows rust. Let's say rust, but it doesn't apply to airplanes.
Come on, just okay. Do that again, but do it properly, okay? It's crazy. So what we're looking to do is we're gonna go through some slides and talk about Dan's gonna briefly talk about what corrosion is, and we're gonna go through the different types and what it looks like. Some of them will kind of go quickly through, if you will, simply because they're not really applicable. And then there's going to be others that Dan's going to jump into because they are applicable. And what I want is for all of you to be able to recognize it and make sure that if you do see it, you do something about it, because we don't, the last thing I want to see is Kevin giving $500 to somebody else because he dropped the wheel in their front lawn. So don't do that in my opinion. Okay, or Nick for that matter too. Okay. So does that sound like a deal? And anybody have any? I mean, in all honesty, let's take a second here. After hearing all that good stuff, anybody have any questions for the? We already got one from the insurance guy. Figures. No, there was. I'm sure there was an insurance claim filed. Yes.
Insurance plays a big role.
How much of that was due to reduced stress upon the aircraft versus actual corrosion?
That was hard to justify. Just recently, we have an annual inspection that I'm conducting on 74 Whiskey Romeo, which is our Piper Warrior 2 that we have in the fleet here. And what the airworthiness directive mandated was a certain type of specialized inspection called an NDT or an NDI, non-destructive inspection testing. The equipment that he brings in is to get a closer look internally. It's almost like an X-ray of the internal components to actually, if there's any kind of crack or fatigue. It's called an eddy current. And what it does is it determines if there's any kind of stress that might lead to failure. Now, we looked at the times on ours, and the accident that happened in Florida, that aircraft had 7,700 total airframe flying hours, whereas this one was a little higher than that, being operated in a flight school environment, but it had passed with absolute flying colors, and the NDT inspector himself did mention that it was probably one of the best ones he's seen so far. And that's because we do actively try to wash and clean the bellies of our aircraft. We look at that, and of course we know that, if we put a little extra effort into checking for things like corrosion or cracks while we're cleaning, that's an important way to prevent something from happening in the future.
Have you noticed more corrosion in Piper aircraft that are retractable gear because the underbelly of the aircraft is exposed by virtue of the wheel wells, moisture, salt, sediment, all the above?
The retractable gear aircraft tend to accumulate more corrosion because there's more crevices and things like that for it to accumulate over time. And of course, a lot of retractable gear aircraft do have complex, like the landing gear itself goes up and down, but the doors do, collect a lot of that. And when the landing gear does sit inside the gear in the wheel well compartment, a lot of times if you don't clean the gear doors and the hinges and places where corrosion from, again, oil, grease, dirt, grime, it will eventually build up and become a sludge-like. It'd be hard to get it off and clean it off if it's allowed to fester. And a lot of people do just look at it and ignore it and say, I ain't touching that. I don't want to get dirty. So what happens is it gets into the corners of metal structures and it starts to weaken the structure, the rivets, the joints, and eventually if a crack forms, it might not be seen till about a year because the inspector does an annual inspection and hopefully when he covers the process of looking for types of corrosion and looking in particular landing gear corrosion. Yeah, the landing gear on retractable tends to be more prone because in fixed gear aircraft, a fairing covers the landing gear and you wipe it down, you clean it up, you can look at it. Internally on like a Cessna landing gear, which is a tubular steel, that can rust, okay? Corrosion in the steel landing gear of the Cessnas tends to down where there is runoff. So down towards where the wheels are at, inside the wheel fairings, that's a big concern. And also the landing gear, the brakes, the disc of the brakes, the rotor, these things do rust, they rust quick. And as a matter of fact, they deteriorate to a point where just like even in a car that sits in the snow, it'll eventually get to a point where it'll lock itself in place and, damage can occur, result or brake failure. So the corrosion is also internal where the landing gear is mounted inside the belly of the airplane, another area that gets neglected because it's underneath the floorboard and it's hard to clean. So when we do inspections, we've seen partial failure of the loosening of the landing gear retaining bolt. And of course, this is noticeable by a wobble in the actual landing gear itself, which can be detected sometimes during taxi when a diligent pilot is listening to the sound of a creak or something that sounds like it feels like the landing gear is actually sticking and then moving again and sticking and moving again. It will make a sound and the bolt will crack if it's under a lot of stress. A lot of times that's not even corrosion related, but it also, it's because of a lot of the stress on the landing gear. But the corrosion inside the belly compartment of an airplane should never be overlooked because a lot of times that's going to cause internal fatigue.
Yeah, all right. So that being stated, that's okay. So bottom line is that we learned that, just to summarize what he said, is that crevices and cracks, you're going to find corrosion. Junctures, we call that interference drag, right? Instructors, when you have two things meeting together where you'd find interference drag, that's where air and water would meet and that point, that juncture. And just to reiterate, where those two pieces meet, that's where the water is going to collect. Where the water collects or debris collects, that's where you're going to find corrosion. The other thing he said, to make sure everybody got it, is then the plane stops flying. The plane sits, gravity does its work. So gravity is going to pull the water to the point to its lowest point, the gear, the bottom of the wings, the juncture, the wings to the fuselage. Those juncture points is once again where the water is going to sit and where corrosion is going to form. So those of you that are pilots, this is things to think about. These are the main points where we will find corrosion and we will find structural issues. So what we've talked, so Dan's gotten into that. And here are some, key factors regarding, regarding design and where we can find where we would find corrosion or things that would cause corrosion. So we have, like I said, lap seams. That's an interference drive. Poor drainage, flawed paint. That's why at IA we try really hard to keep on painting the airplanes. That does make a difference. A flawed paint coating, waxing your aircraft just like your car makes a difference. Then operating environment. Well, Dan talked about every riddle. They might have low airplane times, but they are high landing, high impact, and then also you have a corrosive environment being there at Daytona Beach. So that you have high humidity and you have salt air. Industrial areas, that's the part that IAA runs into though, that we fly in pollution from Chicago. When the air is blown in from Chicago, you can ask any of my instructors, you'll find a nice brown coating of gunk on the leading part of our airplanes, and that's the garbage, exhaust, and other things that is spewed into our environment. And you don't really realize it until you fly an airplane all day, and at the end of the day, you see how awful our planes look if you don't wash them. That's why we wipe our leading edges on our aircraft, because that can cause corrosion. So there's a whole bunch of other things too. But once again, certain areas, certain airplanes, certain conditions are higher exposure.
Right, I can add on to that. You triggered what I'm thinking now, like in our areas, like seasonal type corrosion or seasonal cause, corrosion, where it's because in the summertime and going into the fall, winter, and then back to spring, that changes in moisture, changes in temperature, all these things are causing like patterns of corrosion where if an airplane that's not flown in the wintertime that already has a corrosion problem, if it's not cleaned beforehand and then it, ice and snow and things like that, it'll only make it worse. It'll speed up, accelerate the corrosion process. And then come springtime, like again, when we're going to be flying more, we start looking at, even things like bugs. It's a big deal. Bugs have chemicals in them. They get splattered all over, and nobody likes to clean them. They're hard to clean. I remember seasons of cicadas. Those were like blue balls. So when you get those on the airplane and it's allowed to fester, it does the same thing. Like you can see what it does to your car when it ruins the paint finish. That's actually a corrosive process happening on the airplane, is when they are allowed to mix the whatever bugs are made out of, their guts or whatever. It just creates a process where it deteriorates the paint and then the aluminum and then the structure. So, and if allowed to fester, I don't know, I think it affects the resale value.
You could say that. So on that same, where's Sammy? Where is he hiding? Okay, Sammy's hiding, sitting in the chair. So Sam, we're gonna make his mom mad real quick. Sam, what is your favorite beverage? Say it loud. Diet Coke. Oh, Diet Coke. How many people like an occasional Coca-Cola? Yeah, okay. So we've all heard the stories, right? Highly corrosive, it cleans pennies and quarters and bumpers quite nicely, correct? Sure does. And we've probably even done a science project in middle school doing that, I suppose.
Well, yeah, and it's like varnish too.
Yeah, so anyway, so if Sammy decides to take a Diet Coke in an airplane, so he's getting ready to solo eventually, so you're not going to do that, right? Okay, and that's because mom doesn't want you to have a Diet Coke, right? Okay. So liquids that you could bring into your aircraft can absolutely cause corrosion like a soda.
Well, that's a big deal because you're talking about like, if you get soda, even on the exterior of the airplane, I've seen, where if a splatter of anything gets on there, especially from a soft drink that somebody may have set down or, picked up and then splattered on the surface, where it's so gummy sticky that, it just, it's like glue on there. And at a certain point, if it's not cleaned off, it will start corroding underneath and definitely corrode through because of the acidity of, Coca-Cola, that it will cause corrosion, at an accelerated rate.
Absolutely. So, go ahead. Tim.
Are you recommending beer? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I do recommend a light beer, long flank. It's quite refreshing. Kevin, don't think about it.
Or dual.
I'm sorry, he's a whiskey guy. I didn't know that. Okay, well, that's got a lot of sugar in it, so it's not good. So anyway, so similar to corrosive Coca-Cola, there's a famous story at Illinois Aviation when we were maintaining. It's not that 150, right? The one that's over here is a different 150, correct?
There are a couple of 150s that we've been doing inspections on.
So true story. So was it any of you guys were the ones working on that wing of the 150 with the corrosion?
That one, that's a great story.
It is a great story. So you got this actually happened. So go ahead.
The aircraft that came in, it was being, I don't think it was during an inspection or not. It might have been a routine something or another, but we were looking at the paint that was coming off, flaking, and it was beginning the process where, that it was allowed to deteriorate because it was just, it was left out in the elements.
A little
Disuse, left out in the elements, and just poorly cared for. So at a certain point, the airplanes need like TLC, just like a car would. If you like your car, you like your airplane, you want to take good care of it. But when you see the process take hold, you see paint that starts to flake off. At least maintenance personnel, inspectors, this is what we see just walking by, going to get our coffee. So what we know is that what we're seeing on the exterior is a process that might be beginning interior in the structure, causing it. So corrosion might not start forming from the outside caused by the elements. It might start from the inside. Now, in this case, when we were trying to figure out where it was coming from, and it started to look worse and worse as we were opening up the inspection panels to look inside the wing, where
relax, Brian. You're through.
This was a flashlight that was left inside the wing compartment of a Cessna 150 that was an old D-cell. It had ever-ready batteries that were all rusted out.
We're talking 1974.
This old flashlight, it was the old kind of like plastic chrome one with the red screw on top, with the little bulb that never worked that good, a couple weeks. But this thing might have been used by somebody building the airplane at the time. And I think that the date on the manufacturer was about 1968 or 70, something like that. It might have been, it seems like it was pretty old. It might have been like, it probably at least 30 years old, I would suspect, by looking at that black cat label on the ever-ready batteries that we found rusting away, and batteries, of course, with the alkaline corrosion causing just a nightmare. So this thing actually had to have a complete wing replacement. The wing had to come off, a new wing had to go on. It cost a lot of money. So when you're thinking in terms of corrosion, hopefully you're getting inspections done where they're looking to see that even if there's these little signs of it forming on the exterior, that it may run a lot deeper, where you got to follow that and keep looking until you find the source. And in this case, it was somebody dropped their flashlight routine and said, I got another one, forget it.
So it's crazy. I mean, that was a freak thing. But I wanted to point out where we're talking about, as I highlighted, is batteries. How many people in here own an airplane? Please raise your hand. Okay, I know there's a few. And then how many people intend to own their own airplane someday? Come on, that's it. Come on. So we should see lots of hands in here. We all want to own our own airplane someday. Anyway, the part that we see in maintenance quite frequently is with the wet cell batteries, is that they're overfilled or they get heated up from use of charging, and the acid comes out the top and it goes down into the battery boxes. And Rachel's giving me shivers right now, because we see these battery boxes just get corroded right off the firewall, and we've had to deal with a lot of that, haven't we?
This is something that always gets overlooked during like the routine inspections, only because the battery never, I mean, the batteries do last sometimes, 5, 6, 7 years. You get a lot of time out of a decent Concord battery. They've upgraded to all like sealed lead acid batteries now, where it's literally, it needs to be like, you have to put a hole in it with a screw or something like that, and then would leak out. But normally the older batteries are the cell where you can, kind of old school, where you fill them up with the electrolyte, you add the distilled water, you put it together, they have the little caps, and those caps do leak over time. And the reason they leak is because the pressures build up through the batteries overheating. When that happens, it will spill out the top of the battery. Now that will also cause a loss of electrolyte, which is a weak battery condition. And whenever you have that, unless it's just been sitting for so long that it's drained of its charge, if it won't hold the charge, it might be because it had lost some of that internal electrolyte. Now, what happens is when that leaks out, it never gets inspected, it never gets checked, because it's at the bottom of the battery box. And the battery box is shaped like a container, where sometimes access to it is just a real pain. So it doesn't really get a thorough inspection, because if it's sitting at the bottom of the battery box and you want to look at it, you got to pull the battery out. No one likes to do that. It's your 20-pound battery, and you got to lug it, and usually by yourself. And then, you just kind of say, you take a quick glance at it and forget about it and say, okay, looks good. And move on until something happens. Now that once it leaks through the battery box, now you're getting, batteries are located close to the firewall on most airplanes. This corrosion now starts to get and run down the firewall. Now the firewall runs down to where your lower engine mounts are at. Your lower engine mounts support your engine. These will start to corrode, rust, whatever. And this type of corrosion can cause a crack in the engine mount. And if it's not discovered right away, you might see engine separation in flight, which is not a good thing.
No, I tend to agree with that. So we're going to get ready to take a break real quick. Just got to open up the floor to any more questions before we take a quick break to get something to drink. Yes, sir.
Yeah, it just might be mentioned that not only Coca-Cola, but any carbonated beverage whatsoever has carbolic acid in it, no matter what it is.
True thing. Yep.
I don't care if it's orange pop.
That's true. It's just about anything. You could take a bit of citric acid and orange juice. Even if it, like Kool-Aid or Tang and things like that. Any kind of sugary drinks, anything with that also will cause, that type of corrosion for sure.
That's why we drink the light beer.
I'm talking about carbolic acid in all of them.
Yeah, you're correct. Any other questions or points before we take a quick break? Okay, everybody stretch your legs. We're going to we're going to go through briefly, not like you do in depth. We're going to go through the different types of corrosion next. So please get yourself a beverage. Please get a snack. Don't be shy, please. Please don't be shy. Get something to eat, talk, and we'll catch up in just a few minutes. So like I said, some of it we'll get into, and some of it we're just going to bounce right off the surface and go on to something else. Because I know, yep, I can tell how interested you are. Yes. Well, you've only been here since 7 in the morning. I mean, so. Okay. So we're going to go into the different types of corrosion. And this one, this is a uniform surface attack or corrosion. This is what we've seen and will see. I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about this. This is kind of what it looks like. Kind of ugly.
Yeah, this looks like just your typical, the screws themselves being, made out of a dissimilar metal. You don't have aluminum screws. They're made out of different materials, stainless steel, cadmium, different things. And obviously, if they're not properly treated or coated or cleaned, and you just leave them to rust like that, that's what you see.
So am I correct, Dan? So in this case, what would be more accurate is like if we had an airplane that had paint peeling off. So this would be a case where the paint had come off, and these screws, if they're dissimilar, we would see this once the paint gets peeled off.
Absolutely, your paint is a good indicator because it'll start to cause the paint to flake, and then once it bubbles up and flakes, the discoloration also occurs because of the rust, and those immediately become telltale, which is, I think, a reason why like aircraft paint is always usually a lighter tone of white. You see that the beige, because that becomes pretty obvious when it starts to manifest and show itself, that type of corrosion. So you might not see it if you had a dark paint job and it would be overlooked, but what we see is just on the bare aluminum surface that's a lot of neglect. That looks like that airplane sitting out on a ramp for about 20 years.
Yeah, I would agree on that one. So now I don't know about pitting corrosion. If we see a lot of that on the exterior, is this something I do know that we can find an interior of the airplane with the it does talk about the white powdery. So is this something we find inside the fuselage or outside?
Yeah, I'm reading here that it says that the aluminum and magnesium alloys in chemistry in the environment, aggressive chemicals such as chloride, things like that. That seems like it would be almost like acidic air, where you would have even like if it's acid rain, that in certain environments where there's smog and pollution. That caused, I remember Denver was covered for many years with its own smog cloud. Now, flying and operating airplanes in that type of environment is very conducive for certain types of corrosion that we're seeing on the slides that you're showing us.
So the one that we were just talking about, where you got two surfaces meeting together, hence crevice corrosion. So it just makes sense that kind of like where you in the crevice of your seat, where you find that dime that you lost 10 years ago when you pull it out of your car. Dylan's thinking about that, right? I think I got a quarter. He's thinking. So he gets his McDonald's money on the way home.
Dan.
I'm not picking on you for change.
Well, yeah, it's very important to note that, because you can actually determine the type of corrosion that occurs from the dissimilar metal of, say, a copper penny, because when it gets wet and it's allowed to corrode, it turns that greenish color that you're pretty familiar with. If you've left your, lost change on your floor mats in your car and just let them sit there and be wet, they corrode. Now, if you get that on your airplane, you're going to see, I guess, more closer to that one on the right, that type of corrosion that could occur from just it's the difference between having aluminum in contact with other metals that are different.
So now this one, I'm pretty certain I've seen, unfortunately, in pretty much every plane, every plane I've even seen. I mean, this is not entirely unusual. Am I correct? This is a pretty common one.
Yeah, the galvanic corrosion is kind of what I described, where it gets to be pretty nasty. This is caused by the common aircraft materials, the joining materials, the things that the materials, the rivets, the screws, the hardware, fasteners, everything they use to put aircraft together. Corrosion, if rivets and hardware and things like that are misset or loose, moisture can actually, wander its way into in between where the fasteners and aircraft structures are at and start to form corrosion that can't be seen until it's too late. That looks like it's gone pretty far beyond, the visual inspection process.
This one is a pretty extreme example, but am I correct? So what we'd be seeing is that bubbling around the rivets. That's what this is kind of indicative of.
Yes, because it does form below the surface and eventually it forms that layer of electrolyte on top, which then becomes surface corrosion.
So pretty nasty stuff. Now this one, the filiform corrosion, this might be the most common one as well.
This one is it's very distinctive. So when you recognize it, you do see it more commonly, at least you think you do. That's because it looks like these little, almost like worms, or just, you can see a very distinctive pattern that it makes on the right. This is very common along edges, and it occurs most commonly along primary control surfaces, secondary control surfaces. This looks like it might be the edge of a flap, or an edge of a stabilizer, and these are areas where if corrosion in these occurs near these joints, that could affect the primary control surface, and of course that would need to be addressed. That almost appears to be linear with the condition depending.
And just a tidbit, so something I didn't know. So I bought a Cessna 210 a couple years back in New York, and I saw this on the back end of a horizontal stretch of the elevator. And I was like, oh, we can sand that out, right? And we'll be okay. So I wouldn't be so sure. And I said, oh, no. It's got this little bit of corrosion, and I'll take it back to IA and we'll be good. He says, well,
that's where I actually would stop you if you were the aircraft owner going ahead and trying to address the issue when you see it. Yeah, it looks like you could Ace Hardware and buy some sandpaper and rub it on there and take care of it. Maybe paint over it and you're good to go. No, it's probably only going to get worse because a certain type of sandpaper, we discussed this earlier, when we use certain types of corrosive causing markers and things like that. If we use the wrong type and put it on there, it's going to affect it. If we use a sandpaper that has a dissimilar metal in it or something else other than what aluminum is compatible with, which is aluminum oxide, you have to use that. Otherwise, grains, they get into this, the actual sandpaper itself will leave its own residue from, whatever it's made out of. So if you get sandpaper that its chemical composition is something other than aviation approved, or something that doesn't have the proper composition, that's going to cause the corrosion that you see. And a quick fix and stuff like that, that even leads to trying to, when you cover it over with the spray paint that you're using, you have to make sure that you're not using anything that is got really toxic chemicals in it that will actually attack your aircraft surfaces more than make it look pretty.
That's pretty much what he told me to. So he didn't let me fly with it. And then the irony is that he did it's like a tap test. It's a little gun. It's like where he cocked it up. There was a little metal pin, and he took the tapper and released it, and the little plunger went right through
the tap test that we were told about we use is you can find a common coin or something, and I like to use a spark plug gasket because you kind of hold one edge of it onto the surface that you're tapping and pull and allow the tapping to allow the sound that you're listening for. Because if you have surfaces that are joined together in laps, again, that's that sandwich. Delamination caused by corrosion in between the surfaces that are sandwiched together will cause that And I don't know if you have a slide on it, but there's a separation between the materials, and when that corrosion forms, it makes a distinctive sound that sounds more hollow, that you can listen for when you tap against the surface. And some people use like the penny tap or whatever. There's different.
Yeah, the little plunger thing, but you guys get the idea. So if I see Sydney out there with a spark plug gold ring or something, I don't know why you used that, guys. Okay, filiform corrosion. And we've kind of talked about that. Now, intergranular, I'm not sure if this is one that we're going to be talking about in airplanes. This looks like more like a corrosion you'd see on the Big Blue Beast in the green hangar. Am I right?
That looks like it would occur. That actually looks like the hanger rafter beams being rusted
Yeah,
out.
that's what I thought too.
To be honest with you.
Yeah, I don't think this is really applicable unless we're going to be flying something a lot heavy.
Correct. That looks like it. It looks like iron rustling, basically.
Yep, I tend to agree. So there's the types of corrosion that may occur when corrosion processes are not detected fast enough. So can you talk to me about stress corrosion? I know that's a big deal.
Well, it says here it's highly stressed parts like landing gear, engine crankshafts. Obviously, we talked about the landing gear with the embry-riddle Piper. Now, again, this is going to occur when surfaces that are joined together, especially at spars and structural, joints, under a lot of stress, a lot of engine, frames, like the mounts on the engine, also because of the vibration, airplanes that vibrate, a lot will have an environment that whatever's joined together is going to shake around a lot. And when it does that, any kind of corrosion loosens up the protective coating, it loosens up, it weakens the actual materials or in this instance, I don't know, that looks like a car.
I was going to say that looks
So it's a throttle body for I don't know, fuel injection continental, but.
yeah. The part that I'm seeing though is that corrosion going in through where you have drill points. And that movement, like Dan's saying, that because it's been weakened through corrosion, now you have the stress cracks.
Yes, absolutely. And now that I look at that, it does appear like that's where the butterfly valve is at. So right there is a rod that is in motion that's like moving, it twists inside of there. And what happens is because that's causing out wear and tear around, that's going to allow a place for where moisture and everything gets in, it's just going to manifest. And if it's not if it's not well lubricated and you're not properly cleaning it regularly and testing it to make sure it works, because everyone knows about how butterfly valve likes to stick. So when that happens, you might lose your engine because if it gets stuck shut, you ain't going anywhere.
Kind of limits things. So then corrosion fatigue. Now this one we kind of touched on this one. And going from the pictures that we can look at here, it's almost like tooth decay, isn't it? Where you're getting the corrosion inside the pitting, and it just continues to grow. And I mean, hopefully we'll never see this in our airplanes because this is pretty gruesome. What we're talking about is when it's allowed to actually get into the metal and open it up from within. Have you ever? I've never seen.
Yeah, you can't see it, but it does look like you describe it. So if it is, it looks like it comes in from the surface and starts eating its way down into the structure, the material.
Right. Like I said, I've never seen that. 30 years of operating small airplanes, I've not ever seen it. And I hope I never will, because that's some pretty gruesome stuff. But clearly, what I've been told is that doing a little research on this. This is once again something you'd find in a corrosive environment. So if you were flying this in theory in LA, that would be a prime one because it's got smog, pollution-rich chemical in the air, plus salt water, and equals a highly corrosive environment. So if you left the plane out into the elements and you did not take care of it, you didn't wax it, and you'd have that minor pitting, and you let the pitting go, and it just like tooth decay gets into the gums. And the same thing applies. It goes into it and it expands and then literally rips apart from within the metal.
Yeah, that'll happen. The pitting is like a residual sometimes even. I could describe it more or less, if we see it, it could be caused because of overspray. If we're using like brake cleaner and it gets like the extra splatter gets onto, your wing or wherever. And what you'll see is, if you don't wipe it off and clean it immediately and let it sit, of course, it's going to start causing corrosion.
Absolutely. Now, here's a good word in business, fretting. How many people know what fretting is? And I'm not saying get worried about whether or not I'm going to pick on each other. Anybody know what fretting is? Yes, sir. And how is it applicable in wiring? Right. Do we ever have problems with the wiring in our airplane, guys?
Never.
Never. Good answer.
Who said that?
So, thank you. That was great. So obviously, when you have movement between different objects, such as wiring, it was a great example. We can get fretting corrosion.
This will happen if you've got loose control cables in the control cable systems. And this will happen if the sagging cables that run through bulkheads actually will run and start to, against the lightning holes inside internal structure. And if that starts to happen, what you're doing is you're rubbing away the corrosion protection or prevention that was already applied. So, certain materials, especially with the internal structure, sprayed with a of a corrosion inhibitor, if you will. And if that gets rubbed away because two surfaces are rubbing together, all of a sudden, if you introduce moisture or anything else, it's going to cause corrosion, which can lead to cracks and failure, especially if it's along a seam or a joint or a spar or ribbon.
Agreed. So we kind of talked about hidden corrosion and we talked about the dimpling around the rivets. And here's, we don't really have to get into it, but we did already talk about kind of how it blisters out from the different points. So it's hidden because it's hidden by the paint or sealant. In truth, a lot of times, I don't know if you're aware of this, so most jets, not airliners because it's too expensive, but in corporate jets, every 6 months, we'll get a polyurethane coating on the airplane to help keep the paint on the airplane and prevent it peeling and flaking off of the rivet points. So the good part is it preserves the paint. The bad part is it seals the paint even more. So in the event that there's something internal, you're going to see a nice clean paint like you see in the fire, in this case, the left side picture. It looks fine, but you see how it's like a pillowing effect. You can't see it because the paint and the polyurethane coating is sealing it. But in reality, what's going on is you got blistering because it's
what you're seeing are pockets of corrosion occurring between the two materials that you see there on the lap joint. And yes, that what's going to happen is it grows, so it festers like mold or whatever. So it starts to grow out and expand. And if it's contained in between like a closely packed group of rivets like it is here in this description, it's going to cause ripples. Like it's going to start to bubble out because there's kind of nowhere else to go. The rivets are holding the surface together. The corrosion is forming in between them in a pocket, and it's pushing the outer surface outward. So you will see that sometimes, and when it becomes where it starts to crack the paint and become obvious, you have a problem. It's it's lying underneath the surface.
So then we're going to start wrapping up this discussion with some things about detecting corrosion and what can we do. And so we got some basic techniques here that kind of self-explanatory. Anything you want to add to this, Dan?
Not everyone bases their airplanes in the dry part of the country. That's like out in Arizona, the areas in Nevada near Las Vegas and Kingston, Arizona.
So we're all over Arizona, okay?
But out there, that's where airplanes go to die. It's
Right.
sort of mothballed. So they actually, the corrosion environment out there is only subject to, the dust storms and the wind storms and everything happening on the ground, which acts like sandpaper if your airplane sits outside for too long and isn't covered.
Correct. Yeah, so obviously, self-explanatory, it's sometimes easier said than done, but obviously that there's a reason why IA stores its airplanes. We try to do that because it definitely prolongs the life of the airplane, the plastics, everything. Washing it, we talked about that, how important it is to wash the planes.
Absolutely, because a lot of materials you don't even see, even after a rain, like you said, if it was, sometimes you get dirty rain, you can tell when you get, sometimes the next morning after it rained all night, and your car is all splashed and you can get a car wash. That was the actual environment that it was in. So now you got to think, if you own an airplane, is the same thing occurring. So a lot of times, if you go by what you see happening on your car, you might be able to, translate over to what's occurring on your aircraft. Think about
And my favorite one is probably Dylan's favorite, and that's to ensure that all the windows are properly sealed so no water gets in while you're flying. Right? Sydney's, we've all had a nice shower while you're flying IFR and other airplanes at one point or
it. Yeah, internal corrosion is the worst.
So so we try our best to keep those sealed up so we don't get that happen. Anyway, and then obviously continuing on, so we got inspections, lubrication, Dan talked on that, prompt treatment and detection, replacing deteriorated or damaged.
No, that's really important. Like with the cleaning we talked about, the inspection we talked about, the lubrication part we did not. Absolutely, if you think about it, like WD-40 was invented to be almost an anti-corrosive compound that can be used for just about anything, and it still is to this day. Now in aviation, we do use certain types of lubricants that work really well, not only at cleaning corrosion, but preventing it in the future. So, I mean, just as an all-purpose way of just being ahead of that power curve, then make sure that, parts that need to be lubricated, they follow the lubrication chart, which is located in front of a maintenance manual, and then have it done on schedule during every inspection or routine maintenance, and be checking for it.
And we talked about gaskets and sealing. That's the importance of getting sealing up the cabin and keeping gaskets fresh. Is that correct as well?
Certainly, gaskets can dry out, especially like a fuel gasket. It's in a very corrosive environment because of the fuel itself, which has chemicals in lead, of course, which is toxic and corrosive. But the gaskets will wear out over time. Sometimes that when you use the right, with the gasketing compounds, to make sure that you check O-rings, otherwise they do become brittle and crack. And sometimes you can see that when gaskets are, pressed outward from where they're applied in say an inspection panel on the top of a fuel tank, that the crustiness and the brittleness and falling apart, or if you unscrew the fuel cap and you're just going to have the gas filled up, you could see deterioration and it becomes pretty obvious. So if there's corrosion, again, that needs to be treated, that needs to be addressed. Sometimes if you just replace the O-ring entirely, you're.
So then, we've kind of, I don't want to, belabor items, but we, obviously the visual inspection, we kind of talked about all the different things that we can see on a visual inspection. And then obviously we included some things that we could do that you can do normally, but then there's things like, I know Andrew always carries a borescope with him. That's usually, I don't leave home without an item, but most of us don't carry borescopes. So is there anything else you would add or subtract to this thing?
Yeah, no, the other one that you bring up is the corrosion byproducts. This is another one that you can look for. This white powdery residue, not rust, they're totally separate. The white powder residue is effectively corrosion happening to aluminum. It's attacking the aluminum surface. When you see that, it starts off is that just because it's what the residue that it leaves basically, and when it's like that, and we know what this stuff is because we can see it on our battery terminals and our cars. Sometimes when that almost that white greenish looks like mold that might be growing on, that's the white powdery corrosion that's going on. And if it's allowed to manifest and occur over a period of time and not cleaned up, yeah, like your car battery isn't going to start your car because it's covered in that kind of corrosion around the terminal. You can see that on an airplane too, just as you described it.
And then, once again, the one that kind of surprised me is the last one in here. And when I say surprised me, it surprised me as an owner when we did prop inspections and we took the props off and we found the corrosion internal on props. I'm going to talk about that real quick about prop corrosion.
Prop corrosion it's hard to in any way visual prop corrosion because the propeller's painted. It obviously you can see scratches and things like that. Internal corrosion to the propellers is usually examined by a propeller service center or service shop, anywhere where you take them for repair and overhaul, because they have to use the special equipment in order to internally check. Again, that's like a magnetic resonance eddy current type of inspection where they're going to x-ray the internal structure to see if anything's going on with the propeller blade.
And I can tell you as an owner experienced in this, it has happened to me. They look perfectly good. Obviously, there's things that we can do as aircraft owners. Mechanics can measure out the blade to see if we'll call it its meat to distance, so it's density. So that's a quick check, so they can kind of give you a snapshot of what it might look at. And obviously, they can look at the grooves or the holes where they put the screws in, and they can do a visual. But Dan's right. Then the real test is when you send it in, they strip it down, and throw the eddy current through it. That's how they can tell. And I've had them fail.
Right, and most of the time, all you see is normal surface damage to a propeller, which is the nicks, scratches, cuts, and burrs that occur just from its normal, working life. So basically, corrosion on a propeller doesn't manifest itself in a form that you can visually recognize on, say, your pre-flight or even during an annual inspection.
Then a question I want to ask you, then the last one on the prop 2, guys, is on the constant speed prop. So we all understand we see the outer portion, but we don't see the inner portion that's connected. It does the rotation inside. Now, am I correct that when you grease it, is there a policy like you never mix the grease on a constant speed prop? You try to use the same kind of grease each time?
That's true, because the whole internal structure of the blades being able to move under that kind of stress and pressure requires the proper type of grease. And what you don't know is the type that was put in there unless it was certified by the propeller shop, which will tell you. Now, sometimes when mechanics service propellers, because they're leaking a little bit of grease and they're adding it during an inspection or whenever they feel it's necessary, they might grab the grease gun that they have on the shelf in the shop that is only for lubricating the landing gear. So in that case, you don't know, the next person doesn't know what kind of grease is inside there. Now you have two different kinds mixed in there, and then that could cause, because if you use a mobile versus an aeroshell and you combine the two together and the grease is for different components, then you're going to have an issue and you're not going to see it until there's a failure.
So it's a real thing. Once again, learn that the hard way. So then, as far as, we kind of talked about what to do if we find it, and how things we can do to fix it. Is there anything that, I'm assuming pilots in general, we just pointed out, I don't think there's a lot of fixes we as pilots can do. Owners, is there things that owners can do?
Absolutely. The way you do it is you just always remember that even when you see the smallest, like just the beginning of corrosion doesn't better itself. It always gets worse and worse and worse until something is done about it. And a lot of people like to just kind of if you're on an airplane, you turn a blind eye to it. It might be too late at a certain point to have it fixed. It's going to cost too much money. So, and then you've seen where, like we discussed, the wing falling off an airplane. Now that's an extreme scenario, but that's happening recently now in aviation because of the aging of the general aviation fleet. These airplanes are now 40, 50, sometimes 60, 70 years old and older. So when you have to be cognizant of this when you're an owner, you buy a brand new airplane, you're not going to worry about corrosion too much. And if your inspector tells you that you got it everywhere and you need to check, all day long for it, that doesn't seem reasonable. But if you have an older aircraft and the internal corrosion does start to take hold, and it needs to be, you need to watch out for that, for sure.
So once again, so we're starting to summarize here. So first part in identifying is the visual inspection. We talked about it through scheduled inspections, 100 hours annuals, and pre-flight inspections. Those are the first 3 lines of defense on corrosion prevention. And then obviously the next steps, which Dan talked about, is dye penetrant. That tells us if we have corrosion, and then corrosion stress cracks. And then we talked about the magnetic particle test.
Right. No, the first 2 are the most common. Like visual inspection is something that everyone should be doing if you're involved with aviation. I mean, I would like for it, even if the testers who aren't involved in aviation walk by an airplane, they see something like paint falling off and chips on the floor, then, you know, there might be something going on. They say something. But, you know, this, when you look for everything visually, I mean, at least that's, you know, you're beginning to, you know, have a process where you're actively engaged in making sure that we're preventing corrosion, because that's the biggest thing we could do is the prevention. But using dye penetrates, now usually this is a procedure that's specified in maintenance manuals during certain inspection intervals where a type of paint is used literally to penetrate into the surface that you're inspecting, which will eventually, it'll glisten as like a crack or whatever, and you'll see it under a black light, so to speak. And so when you use that process, it's just a closer look, because our eyes can only see so deep. It's more, it draws out what, you know, what's below surface cracks, and you can see them, you know, through that process. So the magnetic particle, again, this is a test with equipment that does like it's almost like an X-ray, so it does work and operate as such. So that ultrasonic inspection, again, this is using just, you know, radio waves to run it through the materials to see if they have enough structural integrity and they're not corroding thermally. The X-ray inspection, again, is pretty much the same thing, just using a different type of equipment because of the different types of structures that you're inspecting.
Okay, so now it's our favorite time, quiz time, to see how much you learned today. Okay, true, false. Corrosion will always be present on aircraft, especially older ones. Yeah, the corrosion, although we want to try and prevent it, am I correct?
Yeah, I mean, it's real easy to say that, you know, that it will be present, but always present. I mean, a brand new airplane could have corrosion the day a drop of water hits it from a rain cloud. So that, in a sense, is true. Of course, aircraft operating in a marine environment, true or false, in these areas where the atmospheric condition fumes are not corrosive.
So which one is it?
False.
It's absolutely
So if we're,
I'm saying atmosphere contains industrial fumes. Yes, that's because it's corrosive environment, absolutely. But in a marine environment and an atmosphere that contains industrial fumes, a smog environment combined together is corrosive. That's a weird question.
yeah, okay. So this one might be a little bit easier because you know, Tyler washes the plane all the time. All right. Regular cleaning of the aircraft is the first step in preventing corrosion. Thank you. Yes, sir. Well, you know what? I'm glad you brought that up because you're right. So there are different grades of cleaning solutions. I know that some people for cutting grease. So we have different types of cleaners that we use for heavy oil areas, and you have to specifically use ratios. And then there are lesser corrosive cleaning materials that or soaps that you can use. And it can get very expensive if you want to get a non-corrosive cleaning material. So you're right about that.
Yeah, that's true. Regular cleaning is also important because if you're doing that, you also kind of visually inspecting the spots where you are cleaning, because even if it looks clean, you might find or uncover an area of corrosion once you wipe off the residue from like an engine oil leak. So it could lead to other things as well. But yeah, it is the first step, keeping it clean and watching out for it.
So Cooper, I'm gonna pick on you. So this next one's for you. A visual inspection is the most widely used for detecting corrosion. That's my man. That's right. You learned well. Yep. So once again, the eyes of the mechanic, eyes of the pilot, and eyes of the flight instructor. Those are 3 sets of eyes to help her to detect and let us know that we got to correct for corrosion. Good job. Okay, then the next one, I should make this one for Abel because he's a CFI now. So the corrosive product of aluminum is easily recognized by a reddish brown oxide. Rust.
Everyone, pilots and mechanics.
So why isn't it red? So what color do we see when it does stream out? What color is it? It's like a gray color, isn't it? Right? It's not red, not red. And on that note, you passed, Abel, and you guys have all you've done it. You guys are the best corrosion experts now at DuPage Airport and the surrounding areas.
I do hope so, because again, the seasonal thing is huge around here. There's lots of airplanes that sit outside and they go through the cycle of the changes from hot to cold to summer to winter. And again, they're not being inspected regularly. Somebody lets their airplane sit for 5 years, decides he's going to get his annual inspection done, and then he gets the phone call saying, listen, you got corrosion everywhere, and it's going to take weeks to fix it.
And only Sydney would fly that airplane that's been sitting up for 5 years.
You'd be surprised.
Yes. So as we wrap up, any more questions for Dan? Any other thoughts, concerns, stories? No stories. On that note, I would like to thank our special guest, Dan, for coming out here this evening.
Thank you, everyone.
And also want to thank the flight instructors at IAA for coming out tonight to learn a bit more and share their expertise and grow a little bit. So thank you for coming out. And then for everybody else that came out to just be better pilots, better aviators, thank you for coming out and participating in the FAA safety team event out here. Like I said, for future events, please look into the Illinois Aviation Wednesday webinars. The next one is going to be the director of the DuPage Airport Authority, Mark Knowles, will be our guest, and he's going to talk about DuPage Airport. We could all learn a little bit and maybe even ask a few questions so we can learn about the future of this 3rd busiest airport. Used to be the 2nd busiest last year. 2nd busiest airport in the state of Illinois. Illinois Aviation and a little help from ATP will make it the 2nd busiest. I didn't say that out loud, did I say that? So once again, thanks again, everybody. Have a great night and drive home soon.